Welcome to a world where the familiar has turned into the unimaginable, where the ordinary routines of life have been shattered in an instant. We find ourselves in the chaotic heart of St. Jude's Hospital, where Mike, an experienced nurse, is about to face a night unlike any he's ever known. What begins as just another shift in the ER quickly spirals into a living nightmare. As the hospital becomes ground zero for a terrifying outbreak, brace yourselves as we step into Mike's story, where survival means confronting the unimaginable, and the thin line between life and death begins to blur. Have you ever had one of those nights where you just knew something was wrong? That gut feeling, like the universe is trying to tell you to get the hell out of Dodge? Yeah, that was me last night. Except, instead of listening, I stuck around, thinking it was just getting the usual Friday night chaos in the ER. I've been a nurse at St. Jude's Hospital for 8 years, and I've seen my fair share of weird shit. But last night was different. I'm writing this down because I don't know how much longer I've got. I need someone to know what happened. It all started around midnight. I was supposed to be off at 11, but I picked up an extra shift. Bills don't pay themselves, you know. The place was packed, even for a Friday. A few fights, a couple of drunk college kids, a car accident victim. Nothing too out of the ordinary. But then this guy comes in, mid-40s, blood all over his clothes. He had this look in his eye like he'd seen the devil himself. And the weirdest part? He was laughing. "Mike, we got a live one," Pete, one of the paramedics, joked as he wheeled the guy on a stretcher. "Says he got bit by some nut job down by the river." "Bit?" I asked, stepping up to take a look. Sure enough, the guy's arm was shredded like someone had taken a chunk out of it with their teeth. The skin was pale, blood oozing from jagged edges. "Yeah, he's been going on about some crazies all the way here," Pete said, lowering his voice. "Couldn't get much out of him." I nodded, still looking at the wound. It wasn't the worst I'd seen. Something about it made my skin crawl. It looked, I don't know, like wrong. It wasn't just a bite. It's something more. "Let's get him into Trauma 1, I said. "I'll take it from here." We got him settled in the gurney, and I started cleaning the wound. The guy kept muttering to himself, this low, guttural whisper that sent chills down my spine. "They're coming. They're coming," over and over like a broken record. "Who's coming?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Who bit you?" But he just kept mumbling, his eyes staring off into nothing. That's when I noticed something else. His skin was cold. Not just cold, like he'd been outside, but ice cold. I checked his pulse. It was weak and erratic. His breath was shallow, almost non-existent. "Dr. Ross!" I called out, looking around for the attending. "I need some help here, now!" Dr. Ross, a grizzled old dog with a face like a worn-out shoe, came over, glancing at the monitor. "What's going on?" "His vitals are all over the place," I said. "And this wound, it's not normal." Dr. Ross leaned in, squinting at the bite. "Damn," he muttered. That's not good. We need to get him stabilized." He started barking orders, and I went to grab supplies. That's when I heard the first scream. It wasn't unusual to hear someone scream in the ER. Hell, it was almost like a nightly occurrence. But this scream, this scream was different. It was a scream of pure, unfiltered terror. "The hell was that?" I muttered, glancing back at Dr. Ross. He looked just as confused as I felt. Before we could do anything, another scream rang out, then another. Suddenly, the whole ER was in chaos. Nurses were running, and patients were shouting. I heard a crash from one of the rooms down the hall. "Stay with him," Dr. Ross said, heading towards the noise. I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was very, very wrong. I turned back to the guy on the gurney, but he wasn't there anymore. My breath caught in my throat. "Shit," I muttered. "Where'd he go?" I looked around, but the room was empty. I stepped out into the hall, scanning the chaos for any sign of him. That's when I saw it. Down the hall, near the nurse's station. The guy was standing there, his back to me, and he wasn't alone. There was a nurse in front of him. Mark, I think his name was. He was a new hire, fresh out of school. He was backing away, hands up like he was trying to calm the guy down. "Sir," he was saying, his voice shaky. "Sir, please," he was saying, his voice shaky. Just take it easy." But the guy wasn't listening. He lunged forward, teeth bared, and clamped down on Mark's neck. Blood sprayed everywhere. Mark screamed, his body convulsing as the guy tore into him. I wanted to move, help, or do something, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot. Then the guy dropped Mark's body and turned to face me. His eyes were dead, empty, like there was nothing human left in them. And then he smiled, blood dripping from his mouth. He'd smiled like he just won the lottery. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran. Down the hall, through the ER, past patients and doctors and nurses who were all starting to realize something was very, very wrong. I heard more screams, more shouts, the unmistakable sound of flesh being ripped apart. I burst through the double doors and found myself in the stairwell. I could hear footsteps behind me, heavy, uneven, like someone dragging themselves along. I didn't look back. I just started climbing, taking the stairs 2 or 3 at a time. My lungs were burning. My heart felt like it was going to explode, but I kept going. I made it to the 3rd floor and ducked into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. I could still hear the screams, but they were farther away now, muffled by the thick walls of the hospital. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing. What the hell was happening? I didn't have time to think. The door behind me shook, hard. I jumped away, looking around for somewhere to go. There was a storage closet down the hall. I sprinted for it, throwing myself inside and slamming the door shut. I pressed my back against it, trying to steady my breathing. I heard the door to the stairwell open, the sound of footsteps, slow and shuffling, getting closer. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me, praying I'd wake up from this nightmare. The footsteps stopped outside the closet door. I could hear breathing, wet, ragged breathing, like someone who'd been smoking 3 packs a day for 50 years. I closed my eyes, my heart hammering in my chest. The handle jiggled, once, twice, then nothing. I stayed there, pressed against the door for what felt like hours. I could still hear the chaos outside. Screams, crashes, the distant wail of sirens. But the footsteps were gone. The breathing was gone. For a moment, I let myself hope that maybe they were gone for good. I cracked the door open, just a sliver, peeking out into the hallway. It was empty. I stepped out, my legs shaking, every nerve in my body on edge. I had to find a way out of here. I had to get out before... The floor creaked behind me. I spun around just in time to see one of them. The guy who'd been on the gurney. The one who started it all, lunging at me. I threw myself to the side, barely avoiding his grasp. He hit the wall and turned, snarling, his eyes locked on me. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing a metal chair and swinging at him with everything I had. It connected with a sickening crunch, but he barely flinched. He just kept coming, that same empty smile on his face. I swung again and again, but he was too fast. He ducked under my swing and tackled me to the ground. I hit the floor hard, the chair clattering away. His hands were around my throat, squeezing, and I could feel his hot, fetid breath on my face. I could see the blood and flesh still caught in his teeth, smell the coppery stench of it. I reached out, my hand fumbling for something, anything. My fingers closed around a shard of glass, a broken piece of a hospital light cover. I didn't think. I just reacted. I drove the glass into his neck, twisting, feeling it crunch through bone and muscle. He let out a gurgling scream, his grip loosening just enough for me to shove him off. I scrambled away, my chest heaving, my head spinning. He was still moving, still clawing at the air, but slower now, weaker. I grabbed the chair again, bringing it down on his head with all my strength. The chair broke on impact, but his head caved in with a wet, sickening crunch. He stopped moving. I stood there, gasping for breath, staring down at what was left of his skull. My hands were shaking, my whole body trembling. I didn't have time to process what I'd done. I could hear more footsteps coming down the hall. More of them. I had to get out, had to move. I turned and bolted down back the way I came, away from the sounds of those shuffling feet and the low, hungry moans. I was running on pure adrenaline now, my mind blank except for one thought: survive. I took a sharp left down a corridor and nearly ran into a group of doctors and nurses huddled together. One of them, a big guy named Chris who worked security, had a fire axe in his hands. He looked at me, eyes wide with fear, but also determination. "Mike?" he gasped. "Thank God. What the hell's going on?" "I don't know," I said, panting. "But we need to get out of here. They're everywhere." Chris nodded. "We've got to get to the roof. There's a helicopter pad up there. Maybe there's a chance." "A chance?" One of the nurses, a young guy named Danny, said, his voice trembling. "A chance for what? You've seen what's out there. It's a goddamn slaughterhouse." "Helicopter," I said, thinking quickly. "If we can get a signal out, there's got to be a rescue team, right?" The others looked at each other, uncertain. The fear in their eyes was palpable, but so was the hope. The thin, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could get out of this alive. "All right," Chris said, gripping the axe tighter. "Let's move." We moved as a group, sticking close together. The hospital was a maze, but we knew it well enough. Every corner we turned, every hallway we passed, I braced myself, expecting to see more of them. And sometimes we did. Sometimes they were just standing there, swaying back and forth or tearing into someone already down. Other times they were running, arms outstretched, jaws snapping. Those were the worst. But Chris was quick with the axe, and the rest of us were faster. We dodged and weaved through the hallways, heading for the emergency stairs that could take us to the roof. I could hear them behind us, though. Those wet, uneven steps. The sound of things dragging against the floor. They were following, always following. We reached the stairwell door and burst through it. The metal stairs spiraled up in a tight circle, and the air was filled with the smell of rust and stale sweat. I took the lead, my legs burning as I sprinted up the steps 2 at a time. Behind me, I could hear the others breathing heavily. The thud of their feet on metal, the soft, terrified murmurs as they tried to keep themselves calm. "Just a little further," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "Just a little further." But then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the stairwell door slamming open below us, followed by a chorus of growls. They were in the stairwell now, coming up behind us, and they were fast. "Shit, shit, shit!" Danny screamed, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "They're coming! They're coming!" "Move!" Chris bellowed, swinging the axe over his shoulder as he pushed the group up the stairs. "Keep moving!" I reached the top first and threw myself against the final door, the one that led out to the roof. It was locked. "No, no, no!" I muttered, jiggling the handle desperately. "Come on!" Chris shoved me aside and brought the axe down on the door handle. Once, twice, 3 times. The metal groaned, then gave way, and the door flew open. We stumbled out onto the roof, gasping for air. The night was cold, the sky an inky black. There was no sign of any rescue, no helicopter, just the empty, open space of the roof, the city stretching out around us like a dark, twisted maze. Fires burned in the distance, thick columns of smoke rising in the night, and the sounds of chaos, of screams, of sirens filled the air, a horrifying symphony of the end of the world. "They're still coming!" Danny shouted, slamming the door shut behind us, but it wouldn't hold for long. Already, I could hear them pounding against it, the door rattling in its frame. "Barricade it!" I yelled. "We need something to—" But there wasn't much up here, just a few old maintenance tools, and some discarded tarps. Chris and I grabbed the nearby metal pipe and jammed it through the door handles, hoping it would hold. For a moment, it seemed like it might, but then the pounding grew louder, more insistent. The door was denting, bending under the pressure. "This isn't gonna hold," Chris said, his voice grim. We need another way down, I said, looking around frantically. My eyes landed on the adjacent building, a few feet away across a narrow gap. There, I pointed. We can jump. You insane? Danny said, his eyes wild. We'll never make it. We don't have a fucking choice. I snapped back. Look! The door behind us gave a horrible screech, the metal pipe bending. The creatures were almost through. I backed up to the edge of the roof, glancing at the gap. It was wide. Too wide for comfort, but not impossible. If we could just get a running start. Chris nodded, already understanding. I'll go first, he said, hefting the axe. Give you guys a path. He took a deep breath, then sprinted forward and leaped. He seemed to hang in the air for a second, suspended over the darkness. Then he landed on the other side, rolling to break his fall. He came up on one knee, waving us forward. Come on, he shouted. Now! Danny was next. He was shaking, his face pale, but he ran. His foot slipped on the edge of the roof, and he let out a terrified yelp, but he made it. Barely. Chris grabbed him and pulled him the rest of the way up. The door behind me gave another screech, then burst open. They were through. I could see their shapes, dark and twisted, spilling out onto the roof. They saw me and started to run. Mike, come on! Chris shouted from the other side. I didn't think. I just ran. My feet pounded against the concrete, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I leaped, my arms flailing. The ground dropped away beneath me. For a moment, I was weightless, floating. Then I hit the roof from the other side, my body slamming into the gravel. I rolled, gasping, my head spinning. Chris grabbed me, pulling me to my feet. Go, 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 he shouted. We ran again, heading for the next stairwell door. Behind us, the creatures were piling up at the edge of the roof. Some of them trying to jump, others falling into the void below. But more were coming. Always more. We burst through the door and into another stairwell, slamming it shut behind us. Chris jammed the axe into the handle, trying to wedge it shut. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would buy us a few seconds. We started down the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the narrow space. My lungs were on fire, and my legs felt like they were made of lead, but I kept moving. I didn't have a choice. We need to find a car, Chris said, his voice strained. Get out of the city. Head over the hills or something. Yeah, I muttered, though I wasn't sure if it would make a difference. The whole city was going up in flames. Where would we go? What place would be safe from this? We reached the ground floor and burst out into the night. The street was a war zone. Cars overturned, windows shattered, bodies lying everywhere. The few who were still alive were running, screaming, being dragged down by the things chasing them. There! Danny shouted, pointing to an old pickup truck that looked mostly intact. Keys are still in it! We sprinted for the truck, throwing open the doors and piling in. Chris jumped behind the wheel, turning the key. The engine roared to life. Go, go, go! I shouted, slamming the door shut. Chris floored it, the truck lurching forward, tires screeching. We barreled down the street, swerving to avoid wreckage and bodies. The creatures chased us, their growls filling the night. They couldn't keep up. For now, we were alive. But I knew it wasn't over. Not for a long shot. We had survived the hospital, but the world outside was something else entirely. And I had a feeling it was only going to get worse.